to me on reread, there's just heavy sections of Wano where it's like, all right, this is kind of just nothing, or like this is just stuff happening. This is stuff happening. Like this isn't really important. These characters' interactions here aren't important. That's like a lot of what happens over the course, I think, especially of Act 2. And even large portions of Act 3. Like, Act 3, there's really strange, weird sequences of events of, like, characters being like, oh, we need to do this. And then, like, we get a few panels of this happening, but then it's off screen, and then later on it turns out to not be important at all either. Like, Act 3, that actually happens quite frequently. Goomba Boomba says, rereading Wano, and there's lots of bits that don't come back around. Many small things like King being called a torture-loving freak, Jack being belittled. No, that's the bigger thing. So, like, rereading Wano, there's moments that you remember that were, like, cool moments, for sure. But the bigger thing is, like I don't feel this when I'm rereading Dressrosa or Whole Cake or anything like that. Well, Whole Cake, the ending I do, but, and there's certain small things like handcuffs and stuff like that. But definitely not Dressrosa, which is, like, with Wano, when you reread it, like, that's one of the things I thought was strange when people were saying, like, Wano, anybody who doesn't like Wano, it's because it's the weekly experience. If you binge it, you like it better. I think Wano is the arc that's the opposite, where week to week, there's hype stuff that, like, can carry people's excitement for a long period of time. Again, like Gear 5th, or Luffy and Kaido splitting the sky, like the Conqueror's hockey shit. You know, even this chapter, Red Rock, right? I personally felt that was the case. Like, we would go through many weeks of people being like, oh, nothing's happening, but remember this crazy thing that happened, or, like, Wano has these crazy highs and stuff like that, right? I think week to week, Wano actually benefited a lot. Because when you read the whole thing in one go, that's when I think a lot more of the, in my opinion, suddenly becomes apparent how many things didn't really go anywhere, and how many things, like, seem unnecessary, superfluous, forgotten, setups that aren't actually setups, or basically, like, just character storylines or character threads that are basically pointless or unnecessary or don't really add anything to the story, essentially. So I think that on reread, it actually, like, when you get it all in one go, it feels a lot maybe less coherent or messier, at least for me, when I was rereading it. And I'll obviously be explaining more in depth with actual examples when I put out my videos on the story. On reread, I think this is an arc that comes away worse when it's all put together versus weekly. Because weekly, you get the weekly hype, you know? Versus all together, when you're evaluating it as, like, okay, one continuous story, I think it's a story with a lot of cracks in it, like, filled with cracks, in my opinion. I mean, yeah, like, there's stuff, like, Hiyori is trash, right? Like, so that's something someone's saying. Like, when you're reading the full arc, there's certain things that stick out like a sword. Like, we're getting all this random focus on Hiyori, and then Hiyori's gone for a long time, and then she comes back, like, and then you kind of feel the irrelevance and, like, the pointlessness of the character more when it's all shoved together. Versus when it's reread, or versus when it's weekly, it's kind of like, oh, Hiyori's back or something. Like, it's kind of like you ignore these small things or whatever, or, like, you don't really fully remember. You kind of just assume that, oh, yeah, she's got some storyline that's important or something. But when you're reading it all together, it's kind of like she's just, like, randomly here or there, and, like, kind of seems like something's going to go. Like, even just her relationship with Zoro is just, like, it's just some weird thing that kind of fizzles and kind of seems like it's a thing, but at the same time doesn't really... could have easily not existed, you know? Sheriff Lockfeet says Drake, Apu, and Hawkins were sacrificed for pointless Hiyori stuff. There's shit like that, too. It's kind of just like, Drake and Hawkins were like, why did we even need a lot of their investigative scenes early on, throughout Act 2 and stuff like that? Like, it was kind of just stuff happening for it to happen. Like, it was just stuff happening, you know? It's just like, it's just stuff happening. It's not ultimately important for either of their characters. It's not important for on the flip side, other people's characters and stuff. It's just characters doing things. That's a lot of what's happening throughout Wano. So, at least, especially in Act 2, in my opinion. Sheriff Lafitte says, which was worse, Ice Oni or the Yamato Bomb stuff? Dude, the Ice Oni stuff, when I reread that section, I was just like, this is wild. Because the reason being, it took several chapters for that shit to play out. Which was insane to me, because there's so many more interesting characters, like, so many more interesting character storylines, or so many more, like, the stuff that could have happened instead of the Ice Oni stuff. Like, maybe something for Brook, maybe something more for Nami, like, something more build-up around that scene that led to her making that proclamation around Luffy, right? Maybe something more for, like, maybe Frankie versus Sasaki could have been, like, actually a fleshed-out fight or something. Like, there's so much, like, it's actually wild because it feels, when you're reading throughout all of Act 3, especially the battle stuff, right, like, you can feel how Oda's, like, crunching and crunching and crunching stuff for time. But then you get this Ice Oni section randomly that Oda was just like, fuck it. This one can span 10 chapters. And it's just like, dude, this was the one thing you were like happy to give, 10 chapters worth of space to. Like, everything else feels like really, really scrunched, and you can feel like him like shaving off edges and stuff and being like, okay, this little bit can be off screen, etc. But not the Ice Onis. He was like, this moment for Chopper, where he sets everybody on fire and is like, I solved it. Fire fixes ice. The moment that has like almost no I think like it does almost nothing for Chopper as a character other than him like just doing his normal doctor thing, which we've seen him do that in Zoe, and like it's not, he doesn't really do anything new other than like it puts more of a spotlight on him doing it, I guess, but it doesn't really progress his character in any way. He does have the I'm not a Tanuki moment, so like that's the first time he really snaps, so that's kind of cool, but it's not really like, you compare it to the Gedatsu fight, if you read that, or you compare it to the Kumadori fight, if you reread that, or you compare it to even like him versus Hogback, like these are all moments that really progress him as a character. The Ice Oni thing was just bizarre, because like, it stretches for so long, he doesn't really progress as a character over the course of it. It's just like him being like, I gotta solve this. It's fire. Guys, it's fire. And then like, it's just, I don't know why Oda spent so much time on that one. It's kind of crazy.
Nerve AMV Maker says MVP Zoro. Took down the strongest non-Yonko on the island. Saved Luffy 3 times and all Supernova once. Got the antidote for the ice virus. Oh, the antidote for the ice virus, guys. You got the antidote for the ice virus. That's a big deal. Zaibatsu says, Oda mentioned the ending of Wano will be surprising and emotional. What could it be? Oh, well, don't you remember? Luffy made a gigantic fist in front of nobody, and then he punched Kaido over the course of 2 chapters. During this punch, there were multiple flashbacks. One of them was arguably emotional. The other was basically just telling us that Kaido had a past. Not too many emotional details about this past, but, basically told us that Kaido existed and lived a life before this punch. Then Luffy won the clash and punched Kaido into the ground. Nobody saw or heard this. They had to learn about it later. This was the surprising and emotional ending of Wano. So if you missed it, then I don't know what to say. Greg Dovram says, Pro, the main villain isn't just beaten with a big punch. That is quite the pro. That being said, he did ultimately beat Kaido by just making a giant Gear 3rd fist. Basically, essentially just all that creativity boiled down to a big-ass fist. I feel like I could have thought of that one. And I'm not as imaginative as Luffy. Landon Cross says, doesn't pay off setups. Aren't we all One Piece fans? Stephen Perkena says, Pro, it has a low point in story. Alright, we're just taking shots at Wano at this point. Let's try and stay away from that. Let's try and keep it positive. One True Edgelord says, Naruto War greater than One Piece Wano. I personally agree with that.
Here's my opinion of the best Zoro moment in Wano. The coolest, most exciting Zoro moment in Wano. This. I think that this is the best Zoro moment in Wano. I think this is the coolest Zoro moment in Wano.
Ivan back in the card shop says, Little Garden was more dangerous than Wano. Yes, they were a lot more, significantly more worried. You'll find a much more concerned Luffy throughout Little Garden than you will in Wano. Little Garden was stressful period of time for the Straw Hats. Nothing like Wano.
Tsunachi versus Kaido, Momo claiming his title, Yonko bounty reveals,